Welcome to This Explainer. Let's dive right in and totally reframe how we look at English grammar. So often it gets a bad reputation as this chaotic, frustrating web of rules and exceptions that you just have to blindly memorize. But what if we looked at it differently? What if we treated it like a beautiful, logical set of mechanical tools? Because honestly, when you understand the actual architecture beneath the language, it stops being a chore. It starts becoming this incredibly powerful system that unlocks entirely new ways to express your reality. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The ultimate English formula, 2. Navigating through time, 3. The passive voice flip, and finally, 4. The conditional multiverse.
All right, starting things off with Section 1, the ultimate English formula.
At its absolute core, every single English sentence requires just two things, a subject and a verb. That is your baseline equation. You've got the subject, which is the who or what doing the action, like I, you, or she, and you have the verb, which is the action itself. Think I eat or she plays. It's incredibly clean. And there's really just one mechanical rule to remember here. When your subject is he, she, or it, you simply add an S to the verb. So I play just becomes he plays. It's simple, elegant language math.
But you gotta watch out for a really common pitfall when we make that baseline equation negative. He doesn't play is correct, while he doesn't plays is a glitch in the system. Why? Well, because the English language is super efficient. Once you use the helper verb does, it kind of steals the spotlight. It takes on all the grammatical heavy lifting. After using does or doesn't, your main verb absolutely must stay in its base form. You just don't need that S on play anymore because does is already doing the job for you.
And this right here perfectly illustrates that math-like structure of grammar. It's a clean, totally satisfying step-by-step equation to make any main verb sentence negative. Step 1, find your subject. Step 2, add do not for I, you, we, they, or does not for he, she, it. Step 3, keep the main verb in its absolute base form. If you follow this exact sequence, you will literally never make a mistake with a negative sentence. It's a bulletproof formula.
Moving right along to Section 2, navigating through time. So how does this anchor us in time? Well, just by tweaking that foundational formula, we can shift seamlessly across timelines. We start in the past simple by adding an ed to our verb, saying I worked to indicate an action that finished yesterday. We stay in the present simple with I work to describe a general fact or a daily routine. And we project forward to the future by dropping in the modal verb, will, creating I will work for tomorrow. The subject and the action stay exactly the same, we are just rotating the temporal dial.
Now, what if we want to be hyper-specific about the present? That brings us to a crucial distinction. We use the present simple formula, like I work every day, for those daily routines and general facts. But we shift our formula to the subject plus the verb to be, so am, is, or are, plus an ing verb when the action is happening right now, in this exact moment. It becomes I am working now. This structure is the present continuous, and it's your go-to tool for describing temporary, ongoing actions.
Okay, but what if you want to take an action and talk about the concept of it? We can actually freeze an action in time and turn it into a thing using a gerund. By taking a verb and adding ing, you effectively transform that verb into a noun. For example, the action of reading becomes a thing itself. Reading is important. It's a fascinating mechanical trick that allows verbs to operate as the actual subject of your sentence.
As we build these sentences out, we obviously want to add some color and detail to our nouns. But English has a very specific system for this, based entirely on whether a noun is countable or uncountable. If you can physically count the item, like books or apples, you've got to use quantifiers like many or a few. But if it's a mass noun that you can't easily separate like money or milk, you switch your tools. You use much or a little. Trying to say you have many money doesn't just sound funny, it completely breaks the mechanical formula.
And hey, remember this strict rule for detail when you're using adjectives that look like verbs? There is a mechanical difference between ed and ing. The rule goes like this. Use the ed ending to describe how a person feels, but use the ing ending to describe how a thing is. So I am bored describes the way I feel, but the movie is boring describes the actual characteristic of the movie.
That brings us to Section 3, the passive voice flip.
The passive voice is such a brilliant mechanical function. It completely flips the sentence structure to put the object first. In the active voice, the doer is the star, I at the apple. But in the passive voice, the receiver becomes the star, the apple is eaten. This is a powerful tool when the doer of the action just isn't important, maybe isn't known, or when you just really want to emphasize what happened to the object itself. To actually make this flip happen, we need a new formula, the present simple passive. The equation is object plus am, is, or are plus the past participle, which is sometimes called verb 3. So instead of a subject taking action, you have an object receiving it. The room is cleaned. English is spoken. The food is cooked. It is a completely different architectural shape for a sentence.
And the real beauty of this architecture is that we can still time travel within the passive voice just by swapping out our to be verbs. Look at how the mechanics work here. If it's happening right now, we use the present continuous passive. The food is being cooked. But to shift that exact scenario into the past, we just change that helper verb. Is becomes was. Suddenly, we have the past continuous passive. The food was being cooked. The overall structure stays totally intact. Only the time variable changes.
Now, to pack even more detail and perspective into a sentence without breaking our foundational formulas, we can attach relative clauses. Think of these as focus spotlights giving more information about specific nouns. We use who, whom, or whose to shine a spotlight on people. We use where or when to zoom in on a place or time. And we use which or that to add specific detail about things. Like saying, the car that is red is mine. It's essentially a modular attachment that makes your sentences infinitely richer. So, we've basically mastered reality at this point. We know exactly how to describe the present, the past, the future, the objects, and the actions. But what if you want to talk about things that never actually happened? What if you want to express a hypothetical? You know, something you wish had happened, or something that might happen. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, the conditional multiverse.
Consider this framework your absolute blueprint to the multiverse. It shows how different combinations of tenses create completely different realities. We have 5 distinct conditional formulas: 0, first, second, third, and mixed. Each one uses a specific equation combining an if clause with a main clause to shape the exact flavor of reality or unreality you want to convey.
Let's start with the most grounded ones. The 0 conditional is a formula for general facts that are always true. It's present simple plus present simple. If you heat water, it boils. Cause and absolute effect. The first conditional, on the other hand, is your tool for predicting real possible futures. It uses present simple plus will. If I study, I will pass. It's highly likely, rooted in a very real possibility.
But here is where things get really fascinating. We're shifting into the completely unreal. The second conditional explores an imaginary present. It uses the past simple plus would. If I studied, I would pass. The implication here is that I'm not studying right now, but I'm imagining a universe where I am. Then we have the third conditional, which laments an unchangeable, fake past. It uses the past perfect plus would have. If I had studied, I would have passed. This is purely imaginary because the test is already over and you failed. You're talking about a past that never actually happened. And finally, we have the ultimate time-bending tool, the mixed conditional. This formula bridges the gap, allowing an imaginary past event to directly alter your current, present reality. It uses the past perfect in the if clause, and would plus a verb in the main clause. It allows you to say something profound like, if I had studied back then, I would be successful now. You are quite literally tying an alternate past directly to a hypothetical present.
By treating these grammatical structures as clean, logical tools rather than frustrating rules, you completely change your relationship with the English language. You aren't just memorizing exceptions anymore, you're learning the architecture of expression. You now have the absolute power to build any thought, traverse any timeline, and invent any reality you choose. So the final question I'll leave you with is this. Now that you have the actual blueprints to this mechanical architecture, what kind of world are you going to build with your words?